stern though Philip could often be, that his motives were of the best, and she appreciated that.
Into his 90s, public engagements became fewer, but family events like Princess Charlotte's christening remained a priority. In 2018, despite a recent hip replacement, he walked unaided into the chapel for his grandson Harry's wedding. 2 years later, isolating at Windsor, he was there for his granddaughter Beatrice.
A heavy programme of official engagements prevents the Princess and the Duke from seeing their son as often as they wish. It is only on occasions like this that they can enjoy the happiness of parenthood.
It was a long life, where duty and family responsibility often came into conflict. The pandemic, as has been the case for so many families, deprived his loved ones of direct contact with him in his final months. His diminishing influence as the family patriarch coincided with a time of great public and private upset for the family. Perhaps the Duke's steadying influence and forthright manner were missed. His children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be united in mourning his loss.
Just a sense there of the influence over many decades that the Duke of Edinburgh has exercised, certainly within the royal family, and everyone saying today, really, everyone who knows the picture inside the palace, the various royal palaces, that the influence has been probably underestimated over the years because people have been rather discreet about the level of the Duke's influence over some very key decisions. Though, of course, we know that as far back as the 50s and 60s, after he joined the royal family, he believed it was an institution that was in desperate need of modernisation, and he felt that it was his duty, really, to try to drag that institution into the 20th century. And as Nicholas Richard was telling us earlier on, there were plenty of people within the institution who were rather suspicious and indeed hostile in some cases to the efforts that the Duke was trying to make. So we'll talk a little more about that as the day goes on, because there are lots of different aspects to that influence. More reaction coming in. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has released this statement. His Grace says, "I join with the rest of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in mourning the loss of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, and give thanks to God for his extraordinary life of dedicated service. He consistently put the interests of others ahead of his own, and in doing so, provided an outstanding example of Christian service." Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Chief Rabbi, Ephraim Mervis, has released his own statement, and in it he says, "On behalf of the Jewish communities of the Commonwealth, I send our most profound condolences to Her Majesty the Queen and to the royal family on the passing of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh." So lots of the focus today is on Windsor Castle, because Windsor Castle is where the Duke passed away this morning. It's where the Queen has, of course, been spending many, many months during the pandemic. They've both been there for a long time together, shielding, and during that period of great vulnerability, the Queen normally, of course, would have spent far more time at Buckingham Palace. Let's have a look today at the scene in central London, and we see the flags at half-mast. Queen not in residence, as I've said, she's at Windsor Castle still. But this, of course, is seen as the headquarters. This is the shop window in many ways of the royal family across the world. Buckingham Palace is that statement to the world of the presence of the royal family in London. And that famous balcony is where we've seen them gather on so many occasions, and where indeed we've seen the Duke gather on so many occasions, very close to his birthday in June, when we have the Queen's birthday parade and the family appears on the balcony there in early June. So at Buckingham Palace for us is our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell. Sarah, it's clearly a nice, bright, sunny day there. I can see some people gathering behind you. Not many, it has to be said. Probably lots of people aware that the news this morning came from Windsor. It didn't come from Buckingham Palace. But talk us through the statement as you saw it, and maybe some of the questions raised by it for the days and weeks ahead.
Well, yes, indeed. As you say, I mean, it is, of course, the Easter holidays. People are here, perhaps in a way that they haven't been so much recently. But you talk about the fact that there will be a focus on Windsor Castle. But as you say, Buckingham Palace, the London home of the royal family, the London home of Prince Philip for so many years. And so it's perhaps not surprising that this is where people will associate with, will perhaps come down to express their thoughts, express their condolences. And that is actually going to be an issue, I think, over the next few days. There was, when I arrived, the notice of condolence was on the railings, as is tradition. Normally that would have been placed there for 24 hours, but actually it's already been taken down. And I think that's something that will impact over the next few days. Of course, we are in a pandemic, and it has been made very clear that that crowds, any kind of issue, any kind of event which might draw crowds, simply won't happen. And so the emphasis will be on remembering the Duke, which people will want to do, but to do it privately and not to gather together. And if you sort of wanted any evidence, if you like, that Prince Philip wasn't just a British figure, then I can tell you that to my left and to my right there are around 30 to 40 news broadcasters from across the world, and I think that reflects very much that Prince Philip was very much an international figure. I mean, for so many decades, possibly one of the most famous British figures around the world. Of course, the link with the Commonwealth extremely strong, and so it's not surprising that this is where people are choosing to gather. Of course, the flag flying at half-mast, as you say, on Buckingham Palace. And I was just reflecting, you say that the weather is very nice here today. The last time I saw Prince Philip here was on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. It was for his last ever engagement. That was back in August 2017. It was an event involving the Royal Marines. It was chucking it down with rain. It was freezing, but he was in his late 90s. And I think as evidence of his stoicism, everyone else was freezing, wanted to get inside, but he was doing it at his own pace. It was clearly quite an emotional time for him. I think there was a bit of a glint, a tear in his eyes. He sort of said goodbye to public life in August 2017. But it is incredible, isn't it? Saying goodbye to public life, retiring when you're 96.
It is indeed, Sarah. The other thing I wanted to raise with you was this, really. We've had the statement, which of course expressed the Queen's sadness at losing a husband of more than 70 years, and it referred in general terms to the royal family. Would you expect other members of the family individually to be releasing their own statements after this, or do you think that that's the one statement that the family wants to be going around the world today?
I think my understanding is that is the statement that will be issued today, and we shouldn't expect to hear from any other member of the royal family today. Of course, notably mentioning the Queen, it is worth going back and remembering, isn't it, that this was her partner. She called him her strength and her stay for decades, for longer than most of us have been alive. And so it is right, I think, that it is the Queen's, and thoughts are with the Queen throughout this time. I mentioned a little bit earlier the sort of limitations that COVID might bring in the coming days, and I think it's also worth reflecting that the rest of the family, in a way that thousands of families across the country will have experienced over the last few months, will have been deprived of direct contact with Prince Philip over what has turned out to be his final months. And I'm sure that's going to be a huge sadness, I think, for his children, his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren, because as we were hearing, he really was the patriarch of the family. If the Queen was the centre stage in public, he really was the sort of head of the family behind the scenes, but in a way that so many families will be able to empathise with. They just haven't been able to see him in person. I think it was Prince Charles noted sometime before Christmas that they'd been doing, online calls, Zoom calls, but it's not quite the same as being able to give someone a hug. And so I think that will be an added element of sadness today.
Indeed, Sarah, and that's, I think, a very, very important point to raise, which is that, as some people see the family as being rather remote in their view, that's an experience that they do have in common with many millions of people, not just in the UK, but around the world. And that is the difficulty of being together as a family, especially at a time like this, when families, of course, traditionally and naturally would like to be together to grieve and to talk and to reflect on what's happened.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the irony perhaps is that on the other side, I mean, since the Duke retired, as I say, in August 2017, he's actually spent quite a lot of time in Sandringham at a little cottage on the Sandringham estate. And obviously, because the Queen has continued in her role, she has been spending time in Windsor and London, obviously, before lockdown. And actually, during lockdown, ironically, will have brought them together, and perhaps they would have spent more time together over the last year than perhaps they otherwise would have done. So a nice thought there that perhaps the Queen and Prince Philip had many, many hours to reflect on, well, the extraordinary things that they've seen and experienced together over the last 7 or so decades.
Sarah, thanks very much. We'll talk to you again later, no doubt, but thanks a lot for now. Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent there, outside Buckingham Palace. And just to emphasise again, Sarah, there outside Buckingham Palace, because of course that is the global symbol of the royal family's presence in London, but the Queen today at Windsor, as she has been for many months, and that is in fact where, as I was reporting earlier, that is where the Duke of Edinburgh passed away this morning, and the announcement made at around midday by the palace. We're talking about influence. We're also talking about contribution, a very wide range of elements of contributions that the Duke made in public life over many decades in this country, and we've discussed some of the initiatives. One of the Prince's greatest contributions to public life, without question, was that award scheme that he established back in the 1950s, in 1956, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. And many millions of people around the world will know exactly all about this, because lots will have done it themselves at school. At the time, the scheme was seen as very radical. It was seen as very pioneering, and it encouraged young people to explore new challenges, to take risks, and to show their own initiative. And as our correspondent Elaine Dunkley reports, the scheme has enriched the lives of millions of young people, even during this pandemic.
The Duke of Edinburgh's Award. Activities, expeditions and adventures. For millions of people, it has been part of growing up. It aims to give young people from all backgrounds a sense of achievement outside of the classroom through field trips and volunteering.
How many times do you think you got lost?
For these pupils at secondary school in the heart of Manchester, the experience has been life-changing.
Like when you go on Duke of Edinburgh, it's just a whole different environment. It's like green everywhere, like as far as you can see.
Even signing up for it was a bit out of my comfort zone, because prior to it, I was quite shy and reserved and didn't really talk to many people in my year.
I've been working for a charity shop in my community, and I think definitely it's been a very interesting. You get to meet lots of new people, get to talk to lots of interesting people, hear their story.
Had fun and made so many friends without, I don't know how I'd have gotten through my high school years, honestly. It's really, really good.
It began in 1956 and grew out of the Duke's own experiences at Gordonston. The award's ethos was rooted in the philosophy of the school's headmaster, Kurt Hahn, who felt that education should be about more than just academic achievement.
It was based on Hahn's theory that you shouldn't be a specialist in any one thing, and he felt that that you shouldn't concentrate entirely on academic education. His philosophy was that if you could get young people to succeed in any area of activity, that mere sensation of success would spread over into a lot of others.
When the scheme first started, it was considered quite revolutionary, but it also had its detractors.
I think a lot of organisations thought it was going to be a rival. The Scouts, the Guides, Outward Bound Trust, all kinds of people thought, oh dear, here comes another youth organisation to rival us. The cleverness was that it was a programme which was complementary and not competitive, so anyone could do it.
The programme has moved with the times. It started as a boys-only group, and even when girls joined, there was a gender divide.
Can you tell me how you'll be able to get instructors and adjudicators to teach things like marriage and make-up and all the other new schemes you've mentioned in the pamphlet?
Oh, make-up we've got no problem. Marriage might be a bit more difficult.
From helping at food banks to vaccination centres, during the pandemic, many young people have volunteered through the scheme.
Are you here for the vaccine, madam? All right. I think the Duke of Edinburgh is fantastic to gain, especially independence. Everyone can do it. Everyone's helping the community. Everyone's being active. Everyone's learning a new skill. And I think the inclusion of the youth is fantastic.
OK, guys, ready to go?
Throughout the decades, the awards have been based on physical activity, skills, service and expedition. What you choose to do in each category is almost unlimited. Then there are 3 levels: gold, silver and bronze.
It's his vision and energy that created the organisation that enables many, many young people to be able to access these development opportunities. And he was an absolute sort of stalwart champion for young people's sort of opportunities and development right the way through until he retired. While this is an incredibly sort of sad moment to reflect on his passing, we are incredibly optimistic about the fact that we can build on his incredible legacy, and the award will still be going strong many, many years from now.
Its popularity and success has spread across the globe, with more than 140 countries taking part. The scheme that bears his name will perhaps be his greatest legacy, a testament to the ideas and outlook of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Again, just looking at one of the important elements of the Duke's contribution over the years, the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme, which of course has benefited many millions of young people now, adults, many of them around the world, who can remember the lessons they learnt, not just in terms of the physical challenges of the award scheme, but of course the mental challenges too, pushing the boundaries and developing skills in terms of character and personality. A very worthwhile scheme indeed, as everyone acknowledges. There's some more reaction coming in. International leaders have been paying tribute as well. This from the European Union, or from the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. She says, "I'm saddened to hear of the passing of His Royal Highness Prince Philip. I would like to extend my sincere sympathy to Her Majesty the Queen, the royal family and the people of the United Kingdom on this very sad day." From Dublin as well, we have the Taoiseach, the Irish Premier, Michael Martin, saying, "I'm saddened to hear of the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Our thoughts and prayers are with Queen Elizabeth and the people of the UK at this time." From India, the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, has released these words. He said, "My thoughts are with the British people and the royal family on the passing of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. He had a distinguished career in the military and was at the forefront of many community service initiatives. May his soul rest in peace." We also have some reaction from New Zealand. The Prime Minister of New Zealand has expressed her condolences. Jacinda Ardern said, "Our thoughts are with Her Majesty the Queen at this profoundly sad time. And on behalf of the New Zealand people and government, I would like to express my sincere condolences to Her Majesty and to all the royal family." So just a few minutes ago, we were talking to my colleague Sarah at Buckingham Palace, but we were saying that the focus today, because of where Her Majesty the Queen is, and because of where the Duke passed away, is indeed Windsor Castle. And that is where we're going to join our correspondent, Helena Wilkinson. Helena, we can see just a few people behind you there. Of course, the restrictions are still in force. You wouldn't be expecting big crowds anywhere today, in all fairness. But what are you picking up there? And I'm just thinking about Windsor itself as a symbol of not the headquarters of the royal family, but very much the home and the favoured home, really, of the Duke and the Queen.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Hugh. The Royal Standard is flying here at Windsor Castle, meaning the Queen is, of course, here in residence. But as the news rippled through what is a royal town here in Windsor, people did start to gather. As you mentioned there, we are still under COVID restrictions, but I don't think it's surprising that some people, mainly local people, have wanted to come out here to Windsor to pay their respects and reflect on what it was a remarkable life of the Duke of Edinburgh. I don't know if you can see just behind us in the distance over there, some flowers have started, people have started to leave bouquets of flowers. A little girl and a little boy left some earlier on. One of the cards on the flowers reads, "Rest in peace, Prince Philip." Another one reads, "Deepest condolences to Her Majesty the Queen." And if we show you just a bit further down Hugh, you can see primarily the media that have gathered here, but in the distance you might be able to see, I would say, dozens of people who have gathered, but there is a police presence here trying to keep people at a social distance. But as you say, Windsor, of course, a town which is used to many royal events over the years, but today here a not unexpected sombre mood here in Windsor, here outside the castle, where people have gathered. And of course the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh had been isolating together here for much of the last year since the coronavirus pandemic began to unravel. The Queen initially came here to Windsor Castle and the Duke then joined her, and they spent quite a lot of time here together, much more so than in recent years. They were with a small household staff in a small bubble. They celebrated, of course, the Duke's 99th birthday here at Windsor Castle last year. You may recall that photograph of the couple looking very happy in the sunshine on the Duke's birthday last year. They also celebrated quietly their 73rd wedding anniversary last year. But of course the Duke of Edinburgh just 2 months off his 100th birthday, and it was a birthday that no doubt he would have been determined to reach. It would have been a time when perhaps the royal family would have been able to gather here at Windsor Castle. But I think thoughts here today in Windsor go to the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen, who has lost her husband. I think for her, though, there will be some comfort, or she will take some comfort from the flowers that have been left here and the outpouring of grief. Perhaps not the crowds that we would have been used to if we weren't under COVID restrictions, but still some people have gathered, and an indication as well, Hugh, of the appeal of the Duke of Edinburgh, all ages. A little girl walked past us, she must have been about 8 years old a bit earlier on, and just said, "It's so sad, it's so sad." So the focus really here this afternoon on hearing the news of the death of the Duke of Edinburgh here at Windsor, where people have gathered and they've been laying flowers to pay their respects and reflect on the life of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Helen, thank you very much. We'll talk to you again later on, but thanks for the latest there at Windsor Castle. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is still with me. Nick, what do you make of what's being said right now?
Well, just a little bit of guidance from Buckingham Palace. They are understandably very anxious to avoid doing anything or encouraging anything which leads to crowds gathering. They are actually discouraging people from leaving flowers because that brings people together. They encourage people instead to perhaps go on to the online books of condolence, or they are encouraged to donate to charities of their own choice, or charities that are known to have been popular and close to the Duke's heart. So things like environmental charities, the Duke of Edinburgh's award, obviously, the National Playing Fields Association. He was president of that for 64 years. He became involved because he was appalled to see young children playing in the street in big cities in the 1950s. He wanted green spaces so that they could enjoy an outdoor recreational activities, and he became very involved in that. They paid tribute to his tireless efforts over the years. So I think in the next few days we will see that the focus will be very much on Windsor, as I was saying earlier, no fuss. But of course we will see the royal family coming together, and we will, I'm sure, see Prince Harry returning to this country for his grandfather's funeral.
Indeed. Nick, thank you very much for now. By his own admission, Prince Philip's years in the Royal Navy, which Nick told us about a short while ago, were immensely important in forming his character, and throughout his life he maintained the outlook and the bearing of a naval officer. As a midshipman, he was mentioned in dispatches for his bravery under fire. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, made reference to that in his statement earlier. And later, when royal duties replaced that naval career, he worked to keep Britain's maritime history very much alive. Now, my colleague Rita Chakrabarti looks back at the Duke's close relationship with the Royal Navy.
Navy and life at sea were a huge part of the Duke of Edinburgh's career. It had been a British destroyer that had taken him, as a toddler, into exile from his native Greece. Two of his sons were naval officers, Prince Charles and Prince Andrew, taking up where he'd left off after his wife became Queen. Prince Philip joined the Navy straight from school. As a cadet, he first met Princess Elizabeth in 1939, when she visited Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth with her parents. Active service came during World War II in 1940, as a midshipman on the old battleship HMS Ramillies. Years later, he reflected on life as a sailor.
You're exposed to the elements in a way which you're not ashore in any time, because you've got your feet on the earth, as it were, and you've got some sort of security, shelter and so on. Whereas at sea, you're in a cockle shell in this enormous expanse of the ocean, so that tends to cut you down to size a bit.
In 1941, Philip joined HMS Valiant, operating in some danger in the Mediterranean. During the Battle of Cape Matapan, he earned a mention in dispatches for directing searchlights onto enemy cruisers.
We were hit by 2 bombs. The whole ship bent like that with the explosions, and actually bent sufficiently for some of the hatches down below to be jammed. So several people rang up and said, please, can you get a tin opener? We'd like to get out. You know?
Promotion followed, and a posting to a destroyer on hazardous convoy duty in the North Sea, before he returned to the Mediterranean in support of the Allied invasion of Sicily. At the end of the war, he was in Tokyo Bay to witness the surrender of Japanese forces. After his marriage, he studied at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich and was posted to Malta, where Princess Elizabeth joined him as an officer's wife. It was clearly a happy time for them both. In 1950, Philip was given his first command, the frigate HMS Magpie. But his active naval career ended 2 years later, when the Queen succeeded to the throne. He accepted this momentous change in his life and simply got on with the job. But his contemporaries always believed that he could have achieved high rank.
I remember Lord Mountbatten talking to me when I was First Sea Lord, and he said, of course, if Philip had stayed in the Navy, there would have been great competition between you. I don't think the competition would have been very strong, actually. He would have got in.
Do you think so?
Oh, yes.
Royal duties were now his first priority. But the Duke maintained his interest in Britain's maritime heritage. And on the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, he was quick to leave the royal podium to march alongside his old comrades.
The old comrades that he was very loyal to, right to the end, it has to be said. More reaction and tributes coming in. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, I brought you a statement earlier, but the First Minister has now delivered her own statement, and this is what she said.
I'm deeply saddened by the news that the Duke of Edinburgh has died, and my deepest personal condolences go to Her Majesty the Queen and the entire royal family. First and foremost, he was a husband, a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, and my thoughts are with all of those today who will be feeling a profound sense of loss and grief. In particular, the Queen. He was her husband of 74 years, and I think we can all imagine just how devastated she will be at his loss. Prince Philip, though, he lived a life of public service and deep devotion to the Queen. He had a close association, of course, with Scotland. He went to school in Scotland. I know that he enjoyed all of the time he spent at Balmoral. He had a very long association as Chancellor with the University of Edinburgh. But probably above all of that, the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme transformed the lives and gave hope and inspiration to countless numbers of young people. So I think we should deeply appreciate the massive contribution that he made to public life and to the whole country.
The statement issued by the Scottish Government, and of course the First Minister there expressing her condolences to the royal family, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland. Let's just recap on the two other statements I gave you a short while ago. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, released this statement. He said, "I join with the rest of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in mourning the loss of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and give thanks to God for his extraordinary life of dedicated service. He consistently put the interests of others ahead of his own, and in so doing provided an outstanding example of Christian service." We had it from the Chief Rabbi, Ephraim Mervis, who released this statement, and he said, On behalf of the Jewish communities of the Commonwealth, I send our most profound condolences to Her Majesty the Queen and the royal family on the passing of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. So with those tributes in mind, and the one from the Archbishop of Canterbury, I'm delighted to say that we are honoured to be joined by Dr. John Sentamu, the former Archbishop of York, who joins us now from Berwick-upon-Tweed. Dr. Sentamu, thank you so much for giving your time to us today.
It's a delight and a joy, Hugh, to be able to talk to you, and I trust you had a good Easter, by the way.
Thank you so much. And we know how important Easter is to the community, so thank you for that. I'm just wondering, from your point of view, when someone dies at the age of 99, who's had a long and eventful life, who's had many health problems, clearly there is little element of surprise, though there is an element of shock. How did you respond to this news?
I was hoping he would live to 100. The Duke and I were born on the 10th of June, though not in the same year. So we've been sparring partners in terms of being born on the 10th of June. So I was hoping that he will reach 100, and I'll be given the opportunity to say some words about him in the House of Lords. And because when he turned 95, and 90 and 95, I was the person speaking on behalf of the Lord Spiritual about the life he has actually led. And so for me, I just feel that Her Majesty the Queen would also have found this a very difficult moment. But knowing him and knowing her, they would want more prayers, more support, and more encouragement. So I was taken aback because I was preparing my sort of speech I'll give in thanksgiving and gratitude when he reached 100.
I'm just wondering what your impression of him was as a man.
I encountered him, first of all, when I was Vicar of Tarsil, when he came to give the Duke of Edinburgh Awards to girls in St. Martin's School, which was next to the vicarage. And then I encountered him when I went to Sandringham to preach at Easter. And at the end of this service, lunchtime, he would really quiz you about the things you said. I was preaching about Jesus turning water into wine. And he had a curiosity of a mind, wanting to know, and would not just take things for granted. And also, then, of course, when Margaret and I had the joy on the Queen's birthdays, being invited to stay at Windsor Castle, and we met him on numerous occasions. And one night, actually, he and the Queen taking us around the restored chapel, and with his typical sense of humor, showed me a piece of wood and said, now, this is my avant-garde art. And I was admiring it and wanting to know how he saved it. And with a big laugh, he said, that's a piece of wood I saved from the fire. I was really taken, and I was saying how wonderful the work is done. He said, oh, no. And I think for him, I've never spoken to him or anybody without really smiling. There's always a smile on his face. And occasionally you can see a mischief about to arise. And he's the greatest tease, actually, I've actually known. So as a man, I would say that he was very solid. He loved humor, and he loved teasing people, and he loved speaking his mind. So I think I got really very, very fond of him. And of course, the same with Her Majesty the Queen, that when they are with you and they're talking to you, you are the only person that matters in the room. They're not like other people looking around or scanning the room to see where the best conversation is going to come from. So I am going to miss greatly my sparring partner, and I just hope you will allow me to do what he would have expected and what Her Majesty would expect, to say a little bit of the prayer that is prayed in the Church of England every day for the Queen. And it goes like this: O Lord, our Heavenly Father, we most heartily we beseech thee with thy favour to behold our most gracious sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, and so replenish her with the grace of thy Holy Spirit, that she may always incline to thy will and walk in thy way. Endue her plenteously with heavenly gifts, strengthen her, and finally, after this life, she may attain everlasting joy and felicity through Jesus Christ our Lord. So the prayers have been always said, and the same would have been true about the royal family, which I say daily. And I'm hoping that we all unite in offering this prayer for somebody who's really been a great servant of this nation, of the Commonwealth, and particularly towards young people with his wonderful award. So he's a man that, for me, I'm going to be missing a brother. Oh. I'm going to miss somebody who had this amazing sense of humor, but also always standing behind the Queen, supporting her, encouraging her. And you could see it. And the number of times we've met actually tells me here is a great example of devotion, commitment, love, cheerfulness. And whenever there were tragedies, you could be sure that he would actually deeply feel them. And then one word I would say finally, when he had that first operation in Papworth Hospital, putting a stent in his heart, on midnight, I was taking a communion service in York Minster using the 1662 prayer book. And I didn't know he was going to be listening. Apparently, he asked for a radio at midnight because he thought there's always a service being broadcast. And I had a wonderful card from him. Thank you for a beautiful communion service and using the words that I know, and I didn't need a book.
Again, John, again, you underlined the sense of humour, but in introducing that prayer and the element of faith, can I ask you this very directly? Was he a man whose faith was unquestioning? Did he just accept it in an unquestioning way? Or did he have, because, there have been things written about the fact that at some stages in life he's questioned his faith. What was your sense of his faith and how robust was it?
I would say it was very robust. There is an Archbishop of Canterbury, Anselm, who said, faith is always seeking understanding. And he was not prepared to simply take things on blind faith. He didn't want that. He didn't. And I was very grateful. That thing about the turning water into wine, he asked me, do you think what Jesus did is what Urugera did in bending spoons and knives? Is that sort of hypnosis? Now, that doesn't mean he doubted the story, but he wanted to know whether I, who's been preaching in the church in Sandringham, have a reason to explain it. And we had a wonderful, nearly an hour and a half of conversation. And it only came to an end when Her Majesty the Queen said, Philip and his theories. So I think he, for me, I never found a single doubt in his belief in the death and resurrection of Christ and that the church really wants to invite people into love. What he didn't go for is a sort of naive, never questioning. And I think that to question and have a lot of questions and a lot of doubts sometimes is the only way you're going to come to a real robust faith. I found him that he does what I used to do as a little child, constantly asking questions in order that I may gain understanding. And what I didn't understand, to know that there may be a day when I'll understand, but at the moment, what I understand keeps me going. So people say he was interested in spirituality. He was willing to explore anything. Why? Because his feet were firmly rooted in Christ. And therefore, he never saw it as a problem to admire people of other faith, engage them in the way they understood things, and not imposing his wills and understanding on others, because he had his faith strongly on the ground. I remember one day saying to him, why, you're going all over the place. What is that? He said, haven't you realized when birds fly, they fly with their feet pointing to the ground. That's why they're able to take off and land safely. So there was this amazing exploration. And actually, because of his robustness of understanding, he was able to explore. When, for example, you talked to him about the environment and why he was so keen about the environment, he would say, anybody looking around would see, really clearly quoting those words of Gerard Manley Hopkins, that the universe is charged with the grandeur of God. If it is, why aren't we looking at it with great care and great caution, like we will look after our cathedrals? If the whole universe is charged with the grandeur of God, it means we've got to take more care about the environment. And you remember there's that tribe in Solomon Islands that were calling him their God, and they pinned him up. And I said, what do you feel about you being called a God? And he said to me, well, have you ever seen a God in human flesh like you apart from Christ? So when they call me a God, I cannot be a God. I can't be. And if you want, he said to me, you can become their God. And again, this tremendous, robust sort of conversation. And I'm going to miss him terribly, because every conversation I had with him was always challenging. You had to be certain about what you believed. And what you didn't, you said to him, I'm sorry, that answer doesn't come. You know, the new Bishop of Norwich, Graham James, when he first arrived here, says to him, Bishop, tell me, are you happy clappy? And the Bishop of Norwich, Graham James, says to him, no, I am not. I am smells and bells.
Dr. Sentamu,
You can tell me the joy and the laughing about that kind of stuff. Yeah.
No, you've shed such important light for us on not just on character, but on belief and on strength of purpose as well. So, John, thank you so much for joining us. It's really good to talk to you.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you very much. Dr. John Sentamu there, with a wonderful contribution for us and his tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh, the former Archbishop of York, and we're grateful to him. Let's recap on the statement that was issued by Buckingham Palace at just after midday today. And it said this: "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family will join people around the world in mourning his loss." Now, Prince Philip will be remembered as one of the first people in the public eye to champion the cause of conservation. Dr. Sentamu was underlining that very theme for us. He took it up enthusiastically, and of course his grandchildren, William and Harry, also showing that keen interest. For nearly 20 years, he was president of the World Wildlife Fund, and now the Worldwide Fund for Nature, as it's known. And after stepping down, he remained an active campaigner. Our science and environment editor, David Schuckman, looks at this aspect of the Duke's life.
Nature was one of Prince Philip's great loves, and the need to conserve it became a lifelong passion. He fought not just for endangered species, but for the whole of the natural world.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet, just as much as they depend on us.
From his earliest official visits around the globe, this one to Antarctica, wildlife was always a theme. He used his position to inspire younger generations. In this lecture for 2,000 children, many of the pictures were his.
I don't think I'll tell you which are mine, but if you ever see a very bad one, you'll know.
An emerging theme was our responsibility.
If we as humans have got this power of life and death, not just life and death, but extinction and survival of other species of life, then we ought to exercise it with some sort of moral sense. I mean, why make something extinct if we don't have to?
He authored or contributed to a series of dramatically titled books about threats to nature. And he took advantage of his access to governments the world over. He helped to set up the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and he led it for years. On a visit to the pandas in China, he highlighted the need to save them and their habitats. And he went live on television with David Attenborough to make that point.
The panda range has been squeezed between mountains on one side and human encroachment on the other.
His importance to conservation worldwide has been absolutely huge. You can go anywhere in the world, you know, and he will know where you have to make the connection, where you have to put the pressure, what you have to do. And he's very practical in those terms.
But he didn't always help himself.
There was the tiger.
In the 60s, he joined tiger hunts, and he once shot a tiger in India. This image was to remain controversial. It was later said that tigers weren't considered endangered back then. But Prince Philip did have his own distinct views. He supported fox hunting and the shooting of game birds, which set him at odds with many environmentalists.
There is an advantage in people wanting to shoot, because if you have a game species, you want it to survive because you want to have some more next year. It's exactly like a farmer. You want to crop it. You don't want to exterminate it.
So this was a man with his own brand of environmental concern. And he did not like being labelled.
Would you describe yourself as a green? As green?
No. No.
Why not?
Well, because I think that there's a difference between being concerned for the conservation of nature and being a bunny hugger. When I was president of WWF, I got more letters about people, the way animals were treated in zoos, than about any concern for the survival of a species. But people can't get their heads around the idea of a species surviving.
And as far back as 1970, with a young Prince Charles by his side, he was typically forthright about the need to be realistic in the fight for nature.
After all, even naturalists drive cars occasionally. And having accepted that, we must go a step further and recognize that compromises have to be reached. Disagreement is inevitable, but the groups must go on meeting, because we have simply got to hammer out answers to problems which are going to affect all life in these islands for generations to come.
In many ways, Prince Philip was ahead of his time, using his fame as a royal to raise awareness of conservation. An early environmentalist who did not want to be called that, a unique campaigner for a cause that's ever more relevant.
So just another important aspect of the Duke's life and the contribution that he made. We were talking just a short while ago to the former Archbishop of York, Dr. John Sentamu, who of course made it quite clear that he enjoyed the Duke's company, he liked his humour, he liked his character, that they had quite a few sparring matches in terms of discussing faith and other ideas. With me is my colleague Andrew Marr, who also knew the Duke. Andrew, of course, presented the History of Modern Britain and the Diamond Queen series about the reign. Andrew, thanks for joining us. So you met him clearly on several occasions. What was the impression he made?
Well, I think if I said that I was a close personal friend, a dry, sardonic smile would have spread over his face. We met a few times at drinks parties and so forth. And you and I, we live in an age of euphemism where everybody in public life goes around desperately trying not to offend anybody else at all costs. He wasn't quite like that, I think it's fair to say. Like most people meeting him for the first time, I was slightly nervous. And I can remember we were talking about Charles Darwin. And he said, so how does Charles Darwin stand in history? And I said, I thought he was probably the most important Victorian of all. And there was a short pause, and he looked at me very beadily, and he said, I intensely dislike generalisations, and I felt absolutely crushed. And the point was, he intensely disliked euphemism and smoothing things over. He went around talking very, very frankly, and actually I find that very refreshing, and I think many people did. Many other people were deeply offended by it. He's a very controversial figure, even now.
Yeah. Let's talk about the elements of controversy, but within the context of the contribution that he made.
Yes, so you could call him emblematic of some of the most difficult aspects of the British monarchy, the real belief in hierarchy and precedence, the highly sort of military tone of the British monarchy all throughout his time, and of course those notorious gaffes he made directed at Chinese people and Indians and many others around the world. And you could see him as a kind of caricature. He said, I have become a caricature. There's nothing I can do about it. But a lot of people saw him like that. But he was also, you could argue, he was an asylum refugee seeker, escaped from Greece just after its catastrophic war with Turkey. His father could have been lined up against the wall and shot after the end of that war, but King George V rescued the family, and they were rescued by a British destroyer. He was sent in an orange box, in an orange crate. He arrived in France, and then his parents split up. He had a very, very rackety and difficult early life. His father went off to have a high old time on the south of France. His mother succumbed to a sort of form of religious mania and was treated by Freudians in a Swiss clinic. All his sisters married Germans just before the war. 2 of them were married to members of the SS. So he was completely divided from the rest of his family. He was cast adrift in Britain and eventually, as it were, picked up by Lord Louis Mountbatten, one of the more charismatic and difficult figures in the royal family history, and really found Gordonstoun, this remarkable experimental school in Scotland, founded by a German Jewish refugee called Kurt Hahn, the thing that made him, and then the British Navy. So he comes from this he was a real outsider, and an outsider all his life. The kind of stuffier members of the court of George VI couldn't stand him. and really were really quite worried and offended when the Queen married him, so this will never ever work. She was entranced by him. Yeah. They met for the first time when she was 13, and he was 18 at Dartmouth. You've seen the pictures already on the news. And she was apparently completely transfixed by him. And all the way through the war, when she was a young girl growing up in Windsor in wartime conditions, she had a photograph of a heavily bearded Philip on the mantelpiece. And she's been entranced by him ever since. So for her, above all, this is a really, really dark day.
Yes, and it's important to emphasise that.
Yes.
When you talk about the concept of the outsider, for someone who, for lots of people today, actually embodies much of the establishment.
He is the establishment,
yes. So there is that inbuilt paradox. What did that sense of being an outsider lead to in terms of his desire to modernise the royal family, to engage in projects which some people thought were frankly batty at the time, the environment, for example? What did he achieve?
Well, the World Wildlife Fund, or the World Fund for Nature, was one of his ideas. He was very, very involved, and he was one of the founders of it. He was an early conservationist, very close to the painter and broadcaster Peter Scott, who was a very early conservationist, and later, of course, to the Attenborough project, as it were, I can call it that. So he thought things through from first principles again and again and again. He had a very, very close interest in science and technology, and therefore things like global warming, things like species extinction, which we all talk about these days, he was on that very, very early. We saw that in the film just now. But also he sort of decarbonised, as it were, the palaces early on. He was into green fuel and alternatives to petrol when everyone thought that was a completely mad idea, way ahead of his time. He believed, it's strange to think of it now, he believed in the royal family opening up and becoming more media friendly. He was behind that early colour film, The Royal Family, in the 1960s. He was a great supporter of that. He never, ever liked the British press, particularly the tabloid press. Couldn't stand them. They couldn't stand him. The loathing was mutual. And I think he found, as a kind of quite a proud and prickly man, and, you know, we're all familiar with the concept of people who have got an outside skin, a sort of integument or a hide, to hide great personal sensitivity. He was a very spiritual, very interested in poetry, quite a sensitive man, I think, behind all that prickliness. He found the endless observation and voyeurism of life in the public eye in this very, very competitive media world we all live in, almost intolerable. I think that was the hardest thing probably throughout his life. But as I say, he was a sensitive man, and he was very acutely aware of his children's marital difficulties and his grandchildren. And privately, behind the scenes, I'm told, he spent a lot of time working with, for instance, Diana during her darkest and bleakest moments, trying to win her round, trying to jolly her up. He might not have always had the most tactful, most modern way of putting things, but he was a sensitive man.
That was the point I was going to raise, Andrew, which was to do with the last few decades where there have been very public differences and very public problems for the family. What would have been the extent of his influence behind the scenes in terms of trying to find solutions to those? You suggest it was big.
Well, of course, the royal family is, as it were, a matriarchy. It's headed by a woman, but internally it was a patriarchy. He was the big daddy in the family, as it were. He was the person people went to with their problems and was slightly nervous about his reaction, no doubt, from time to time. But he talked to all of them a lot. He reflected on his own upbringing, which, as I say, was very difficult. Yeah. And he knew what it was like to try and join this very, very difficult, very hierarchical, very traditional and quite sort of rebarbative organisation, the royal family. He knew how hard it was, and therefore I think he had a sensitivity for others, perhaps including Meghan, I don't know, trying to do the same thing in later generations.
When people, as they will now for days to come, until the funeral happens, whenever that is, as people try to sum up his life and try to sum up his importance to the Queen, try to sum up his importance to public life in the UK, it's one thing to do it in the next few days. What will people be making of Prince Philip, let's say in 5 or 10 years' time? What will be the lasting legacy, if there is one?
Well, that's a really hard question to end on. Thanks for that. But I think what is absolutely clear is that, as Nick Witchell was saying, it is impossible to imagine this Queen's reign without him. She was constantly turning to people and saying, what does Philip think? What does Philip think about this or that? Yeah. He was right beside her all the way through. And therefore, it was, in many senses, and I don't want this to sound offensive, it was almost like a joint reign. He was absolutely crucial. It has been one of the longest reign in British history, and she has taken us from one kind of country, almost all white, very, very class divided, loving our empire and all the rest of it, to a completely different country that we are today. However long we stay together as a country, who knows? She's taken us on that journey, and he has been there on every step of the way. I think more, in fact, as a moderniser and a reformer than his public reputation today suggests.
Andrew, good to talk to you as ever. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Andrew Marr there with his eloquent analysis of the Duke's contribution and character based on his own knowledge and, of course, his reading of how things have developed over the years. We're grateful to him. Now, the Duke of Edinburgh's sporting activities are yet another aspect of his life that we haven't discussed properly, provided him with a welcome opportunity to get away from the more formal aspects of royal duty. And for him, sport became an outlet for restless energy, and he proved himself to be a keen and talented competitor in a number of different sports. Now, our correspondent Natalie Perks looks back at the Duke's life in sport.
Prince Philip always enjoyed sport, and he often excelled at it. At school, he learned to love sailing. As a wedding present, he and the Queen were given a yacht. The Duke took part in the Royal Regatta at Cowes for 50 years, even winning the most prestigious trophy, the Britannia Cup, with his friend Uffa Fox in 1952.
The thing about going to sea is you're suddenly exposed to an element which you can't really control. You're subject to it, and I think that's quite good for the soul, frankly.
And now a change of bowling from the pavilion end.
As an enthusiastic cricketer, he also drew praise from high places.
Another moved across the leg. He has a perfect action for a right-hand off-spin bowler.
But what you might not know is just how the playing fields around us are a huge part of his legacy. While councils were busy selling them off, his tireless fundraising campaign led to thousands of UK sites being saved.
It's a true testament to his passion and commitment to sport and the opportunities that he saw that sport could create for so many young people who didn't necessarily have access to green space.
The Duke shared the Queen's love of horses and became one of the top 4 polo players in Britain in the mid-60s, cementing the sport as a firm royal favourite. Arthritis ended his playing career at 50.
Go on, you stupid hawk! Get on!
But carriage driving became his new passion, and he was instrumental in drawing up the rules. He helped raise its profile and competed for Britain at World and European Championships.
Great Britain was represented by George Bowman.
Fellow teammate George Bowman remembered him fondly.
I was a scrap merchant. And of course, he was a prince. And at times people made a lot about this. But he never treated me any different. He always looked at me like an equal. And that was one of the things I really admired about him.
Despite some hair-raising spills along the way, the Duke carried on well into old age. His passion made sport a family affair.
Not just keen on sport, but a very, very talented and, of course, competitive sportsman as well. The Duke of Edinburgh's life in sport, just a sense of what he was really engaged in over several decades and how those interests really changed as he got older. Let's just think about, again, the contribution that he made, not so much interests such as sport, but the way that the Duke developed interests and then tried to change direction of policy, tried to change people's habits when it came to the environment, tried to change people's attitudes to things, and to think about where he stands really in the gallery, if you like, of British public life over the last 60 years or so. And I'm pleased to say that the historian and author, Professor Kate Williams, joins us now. Kate, thanks so much for sharing your time with us today. First of all, let's just have your sense of what the Duke's death signifies in terms of, you know, the gap that he leaves.
He does leave a gap. This really is the end of an era. The Duke was born in 1921. He saw so many changes in the 20th century, the 21st century. He has been the longest serving consort, the Queen, the longest reigning monarch, of course, and he's been the longest serving consort since 1952. Not too many years after their marriage, both the Duke and the Queen, they expected to have, I think, you know, a good 10, 15 years as a young married couple together, and the Queen perhaps to come to the throne at 40. But the King George VI, died so very young comparatively, and they were catapulted into this new life. And it's one to which the Duke, with his glittering naval career, he fought so bravely on the Allied side, suffered a lot of anti-German prejudice after the war, despite all of his service. He really threw himself into his role as consort, even though there were times when he was mistrusted and sort of ignored and overlooked, and did so much for British science, British engineering, British design, and 22,000 engagements, 5,000 speeches, over 750 charities. And really, I think because he came from this, his life, he'd suffered so much as a child. His family had to flee Greece when he was 18 months old. He lived in exile. He never felt he had a fixed home. He always saw, I think, that the royal family ruled, and said that they ruled by the consent of the people. If the people didn't want them anymore, they would no longer be there. So he had a lot of attention to how the royal family appeared. He thought very carefully about the Queen on her royal mint, on Mary Gillick, who made the sculpture of the Queen to go on the royal mint coins when the Queen came to the throne, and also was particularly instrumental in the coronation being televised. The idea that TV cameras should come in and show the monarchy as they were and invite the people in. So he leaves a great gap. He was a great force of energy, of devotion to the monarchy, and above all, in a time when men really did not walk behind their wives. He put so much into the role of consort, so devoted to the monarchy, to the Queen, to the country. And I think for so many, they thought he would always be around. And it's so sad that he's passed just a few months before his 100th birthday.
Kate, when we look back at his life and we think about, obviously, the family life, and he was such a dominant force within the royal family, then we think of the causes that he supported. You mentioned, hundreds of them in some cases where the charities were concerned. What will stand out for people in years to come? Will it be the fact that he backed some causes which in their time were not fashionable, that he was forward-looking, that in terms of the environment, in terms of conservation, he was way ahead of his time on those? Will they be the ones that stand out?
Yes, I think the environment, conservation, the WWF, the idea of conserving species. I was just learning yesterday that 1 in 4 mammals in Britain's the National Trust are endangered. These were things that Prince Philip was talking about long before anyone really understood or paid much recognition in wider public life to conservation. His advocacy of conservation and of design, of engineering, the Prince Philip Design Prize. So post-war Britain was suffering a terrible recession. Let's remember that the marriage of Elizabeth and Philip was not made a day off because it was thought a day off would affect the economy too badly. And when the Queen became the Queen, there was still the suffering of recession. And really, Philip, I think, saw the importance of design, of engineering, was very vital in the setting up of the Royal College of Engineering, of the Prince Philip Design Prize, and even his own personal design. He was very instrumental in designing a window in Windsor Castle after it burnt down in 1992. He really, I think, espoused these causes that no one really recognised at the time. And I think the commercial value of engineering and design, conservation, and also young people, the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which set up in 1956, it's done by so many young people, and given the idea of empowerment, the idea of giving them new hobbies. I did it myself. I'm sure you did as well, Hugh. And always thinking, trying to be a step ahead of what you could do with the role of consort. And I think really develop the role of consort to be not just always backing up the Queen, but developing a huge amount of his own ideas, engagements, and indeed endeavours as well. And he's raised the bar very high in terms of those you have to follow.
Kate, you don't want to talk about my performance in the Duke of Edinburgh scheme. We'll gloss over that very quickly. It's good to talk to you as ever, Kate. Thank you so much for joining us. Professor Kate Williams there, joining us there, the historian and the author, with her thoughts on the legacy of the Duke of Edinburgh. Let's go back to Windsor at this point and talk to our correspondent, Helena Wilkinson. People have been laying flowers, I think, Helena, haven't they? What's been going on?
Yes, they have, Hugh. The Royal Standard is flying here at Windsor Castle, which means, of course, that the Queen is here in residence. But this really has become a focal point here at Windsor Castle. This, as we now know, is where the Duke of Edinburgh died peacefully this morning. But if we try and show you some of the flowers that have been left outside the castle over the last 3 hours or so. Some simple messages on some of the cards. One of them simply reads, "Rest in peace, Prince Philip." Another one is addressed to Her Majesty the Queen, sending deepest condolences. Now, a bit earlier on, Hugh, there were, I would say, dozens of people who had gathered outside the castle. Not surprisingly, a sombre, reflective mood for those people who have come to reflect on what was a remarkable life, and a remarkably long life as well. The Duke of Edinburgh, of course, just 2 months off his 100th birthday. You can see down past the castle, there are still some crowds here, but they tend to come and then move on fairly quickly. And of course, don't forget, we still have the COVID restrictions. There are a number of officers dotted around, but they don't seem to have had to do a great deal, given that people are coming, perhaps leaving flowers, spending a little bit of time here, and then moving on. As you know, Hugh, the Duke of Edinburgh spent a month in hospital in London. He was treated for an infection and also a pre-existing heart condition. He arrived back here at Windsor Castle around 3 weeks ago or so, and was reunited with the Queen, of course, here at the castle. And they had spent the last year, since the pandemic began to unravel, both the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh spent time here together in a small bubble with household staff here at the castle. The Duke celebrated quietly his 99th birthday here last year, and they also celebrated their wedding anniversary. And you may remember the pictures of the Duke of Edinburgh released by the Palace last year on his 99th birthday. The Queen and the Duke looking happy in the sunshine here at the castle. But thoughts here for those people who have gathered here at the castle, Hugh, very much with Her Majesty the Queen, and I think the Queen will no doubt take comfort from the outpouring of grief. I think it's fair to say here, with the dozens of flowers that have been left here, to remember the Duke of Edinburgh, who has died at the age of 99.
Helena, thank you so much again. Helena Wilkinson there with the latest. A very sunny Windsor, the castle there, and the Royal Standard just out of view on the right-hand side, showing that the Queen is in residence today, and that is where the Duke passed away this morning at the age of 99. Now, if you're just joining us, wherever you are around the world, here in the UK, or indeed overseas in all corners of the world on our BBC World Service, I'm welcoming all of you to this special programme, which is being offered by BBC News following the announcement of the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Philip's death was announced at about midday London time in a statement from Buckingham Palace, and this is what the statement said. It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle, and further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss. Our coverage will continue, and my colleague Rita Chakrabarti will be joining you in just a few minutes' time. Before that, it seems a good moment for us to pause and to just reflect on a very long and a very rich life that was lived by the Duke of Edinburgh. He was within weeks of his 100th birthday. He died at the age of 99. And to understand a little more about that life, what he made of it, how he took advantage of his opportunities, how he backed certain causes, and how he made a huge contribution to public life in the UK, here's my colleague Nicholas Witchell.
First after them, her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who, with his hands between the hands of the Queen, becomes her liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship.
At the Queen's coronation, he was the first person after the bishops to pay homage to her. Philip knelt before his wife and pledged his loyalty.
Faith and truth I will bear unto you,
And so, rising, touches the crown upon her head and kisses her upon the left cheek.
As a male consort to a female sovereign, Philip had no constitutional significance. Yet no one was closer to the monarchy or of greater importance to the monarch than he was. By instinct he was a leader, yet Philip had always to take second place. By nature he spoke his mind, and that sometimes got him into trouble. Yet for decade after decade, his was the support that mattered most to the throne. Philip was born in Corfu in 1921. His family was part of European royalty. He was a prince of Greece, but his ancestors were largely Danish, German and Russian. Philip had a rootless childhood. His family was banished from Greece, his parents separated, and he was sent to Gordonston School in northern Scotland. The Spartan atmosphere there suited him. As the Second World War loomed, Philip was an 18-year-old Royal Navy cadet at Dartmouth.
His Majesty walking down the ranks of the cadets.
And when the King and Queen visited the college, they brought with them their 13-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth. According to witnesses, Philip showed off a great deal, but the meeting had made a deep impression on the princess. Philip served in the Royal Navy with distinction during the war. When the fighting ended, he started to escort Elizabeth to family gatherings. He changed his name to Philip Mountbatten and became a British citizen. The public realised there was a romance. Yet within Buckingham Palace, Philip was regarded with suspicion. One courtier wrote privately that he was rough, uneducated, and would probably not be faithful. But Elizabeth was deeply in love, and in the summer of 1947, the palace announced their engagement.
It is with the greatest pleasure that the King and Queen announced the betrothal of their dearly beloved daughter, the Princess Elizabeth, to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, R.N.
On the 20th of November 1947, the newly created Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, stood within Westminster Abbey and exchanged marriage vows with the heir to the British throne.
I, Philip. I, Philip. Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. To my wedded wife. To my wedded wife.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
In 1952, the couple set off on a tour of the Commonwealth. The King came with them to the airport. It was the last time they were to see King George VI, who, unknown to his daughter, was in the final stages of lung cancer.
It was a farewell. It was also, as events turned out, goodbye.
It was at a hunting lodge in Kenya that Philip told his wife of her father's death. Someone who was there said Philip looked as though half the world had dropped on him. They returned to London to lead the national mourning.
And now here is the Queen.
His wife was now Queen. Philip was there in support, but he was never given the title Prince Consort, and his role was undefined. He channeled some of his restless energy into a boisterous social life. He and a group of male friends met every week in rooms above a restaurant in London's Soho. There were long, convivial lunches, visits to nightclubs, and glamorous companions. By the 1960s, Philip's life was more settled. He and the Queen had completed their family with 2 more children, Andrew and Edward, who joined Charles and Anne, and he had found a new role for himself.
Is it the 18th we're due back now?
80.
From his office in the palace, he promoted issues in which he had a personal interest.
40 minutes to get round the world. Well, it's going to be a bit of a rush. It may leave you a little bit muddled.
Yet diplomacy seemed alien to him. He urged British industry to pull its finger out and complained on American television that the royal family didn't have enough money.
Inevitably, if nothing happens, we shall either have to, I don't know, we may have to move into smaller premises, who knows?
He blundered on a state visit to China with the Queen. He made what he thought was a private remark about slitty eyes. It was a diplomatic gaffe which dominated the headlines and added to his reputation for making misjudged remarks.
So I see.
Yet Philip had a sharp, inquiring mind and was determined to make a contribution of his own. The groundbreaking 60s film Royal Family was made largely at his instigation because he felt it was time for the family to show a more human face to the world.
The salad is ready.
Good.
And for many years he toured the globe as president of the then World Wildlife Fund, speaking out about the need to conserve nature.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet, just as much as they depend on us.
He promoted technology, helped underprivileged children, and had a lifelong interest in spiritual issues. But his most lasting creation was the scheme named after him, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, which encouraged young people to realise their potential.
To give young people a chance to discover their own abilities for themselves as an introduction to the responsibilities and interests of the grown-up world, and incidentally, to make new friends and have a great deal of fun and satisfaction in the process.
No decade was more difficult for the royal family than the 1990s. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, was both a family tragedy and a moment of tension for the monarchy. It was the Queen to whom the country looked for public comfort. It was Philip to whom the Queen turned for private support.
And still Prince William, with his head hung, walking next to his grandfather.
It was Philip whose gentle encouragement had persuaded William and Harry to walk behind their mother's coffin to her funeral. And, contrary to his sometimes insensitive image, it had been Philip who'd taken the lead in trying to understand the domestic problems of his children, prompted perhaps by his own memories of what it's like to marry into the royal family. Philip remained physically active at an age when most men would have relished retirement. He went carriage driving, and he was still carrying out more engagements than many younger members of the family. Some he did alone, such as this visit to British troops in Iraq.
How did you get into this?
But most he did with his wife. He was the figure a few paces behind the Queen, always looking out for her, and often guiding children through the barriers to present their flowers to her. By the time of his 90th birthday in June 2011, celebrated at his insistence with little fanfare, he'd accepted that it was time to slow down a little.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say. On top of that, memories going. I can't remember names and things. Yes, I'm just sort of winding down.
There was little immediate evidence, though, of any winding down. Despite a serious health scare at Christmas 2011, when he had to be taken to hospital with a blocked coronary artery, he remained at the Queen's side for most of her Diamond Jubilee programme, which took them the length and breadth of the country. It wasn't until 2017 that the Duke, then aged 96, carried out his final solo engagement. It was a parade for the Royal Marines on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. It was pouring with rain, but, as ever, duty took priority. He took his time meeting those on parade and taking the salute as the Marines marched past to bid him farewell. His life after that was much quieter, spent mostly at the Queen's estate at Sandringham. It was there in January 2019, while he was driving himself from the estate, that he survived a serious road accident. His vehicle overturned, he was badly shaken, and he surrendered his driving licence shortly afterwards. By now he was rarely seen in public. There were occasional appearances at family occasions such as weddings, yet he remained a supportive figure to the Queen and his family. Throughout his adult life, despite the formality of his position, Philip retained his own style of doing things. He made his own uncompromising mark on national life. He once summed up his approach in characteristically forthright fashion.
I've just done what I think is my best. I can't suddenly change my whole way of doing things. I can't change my interests. I can't change the way in which I react to things. It's part of that's somebody's style, and it's too bad. Lumpy.
Throughout all the monarchy's many ups and downs since the Second World War, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the longest-serving consort in British history, was the restless outsider who put his wife and duty first. In doing so, he fulfilled his coronation oath of allegiance to Elizabeth, his Queen. Their marriage and his support were the essential foundations which underpinned the success of her reign. In a speech to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary, the Queen spoke of the debt that she and the country owed him.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
You are watching a special programme here on BBC News. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, at the age of 99. Prince Philip was by far the longest-serving consort in British history, a role that he shaped from the start.
Try and grow into it, and that was by trial and error. And, there was no precedent. But if I asked somebody what you expect me to do, they all looked blank. They had no idea. Nobody had much idea.
He was 26 when he married the then Princess Elizabeth in 1947. Within 5 years, she would be Queen.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Tributes to the Duke and messages of condolence to the Queen have been sent from leaders around the world, including here in the UK.
We mourn today with Her Majesty the Queen. We offer our condolences to her and to all her family. And we give thanks as a nation and a kingdom for the extraordinary life and work.
Have been laying flowers outside the gates of Windsor Castle, where the Duke passed away peacefully this morning. And the flag is flying at half-mast at Buckingham Palace. We'll be looking back and reflecting on the Duke's extraordinary